Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Mountains We Climb. This is a series where we dive into people's journeys of overcoming challenges and adversity in their lives so that we can understand what is really possible and what it really takes. I'm your host, Jordan Kilpatrick Smith, and in this week's episode, we're going to be exploring Mike Zenker's journey of growing up while being physically and verbally abused at home and sexually abused by a church clergy, to becoming a pastor and chaplain, teaching what it really means to forgive. Mike, thanks so much for being here with me.
Thank you. This is going to be quite exciting.
Yeah. So where does this crazy story of yours start?
Well, I was born at an early age. No, I'm kidding. It started with my upbringing. I grew up in a really strict German Baptist home. So I got double whammy. I got strict Baptist and I got strict German. So that kind of mentality back in the late 60s and early 70s, that's the way people were raised. Corporal punishment was a normal thing. You spanked your kids, whatever. But my mom got a little bit too much. She was way too heavy. So yeah, that's where it kind of began.
And so can you tell me what was going on with your mom? You said, she got heavy, too heavy with it. What does that mean?
Yes, she was very physically violent. One of the discipline methods she had, and I'm probably one of the ones that got most of it. She used to cut up old garden hoses and drill a hole through a tip of one of them and put a string on it and then tap a nail into a closet. And she'd hang these hitting sticks, spanking sticks all around the house. They're always accessible. So I got hit a lot. Whether it's spanked or if I got caught stealing, I had to put my hands out and she would rail on them, like just reef on my knuckles and things like that. Or if I was getting spanked and I was crying too loud, she'd smack me with the back of the head because I'm leaning over her, like with my bum, and she'd say, "Not so loud!" Boom! She'd smack my head. It's like as if that's helpful. If I knew I was going to get it, I'd be putting on extra layers of underwear or trying to fit a book in there so it wouldn't hurt so much. Yeah. Like all kinds of coping mechanisms, And that was the world I lived in. I was afraid all the time. Whenever I heard her footsteps come down the steps, because our room was in the basement. We were in a family of 6 in a 2-bedroom, 1.5-story home, and had university renters in the basement at the time.
Right.
But then we ended up moving around, and then I have 2 brothers and a sister, but my 2 brothers and I were in a larger room downstairs, split up by furniture. So we could hear her coming downstairs, and it was just the environment that it was a toxic environment of fear, and we'd do anything we could to get out of the house. Each of us have our own lenses of how we heard the story and how we see what happened. My oldest brother, I think he got smacked around a lot. The next older brother, John, he was the jock in the family, always out doing sports and favored. He doesn't remember half of this, which is really weird. Yeah. And then my sister, of course, she got the reaming and yelling, and she got, too bad. I had to rescue her many times. So, but my brothers rescued me from my mom, when they thought she was hitting me too much. So that was the environment. Oh, then we go to church, and everybody loved my sweet little mother. It's like, oh, you guys don't know her. So that's the kind of European environment I grew up in. So we did anything we could to get out of the house, to not be there. If it was kids camp that we could go to, yes, kids camp. And then I ended up getting a paper route. And this paper route is where I started delivering the local Kitchener-Waterloo Record to a church on Blueville Avenue, a Catholic church. And
Can I just pause you there for 1 second, Mike?
Yeah.
I just want to go back to your family growing up.
Yeah, sure.
Where was your father's opinion on all of this?
Oh, good point. I did think of it for a second. So the dynamics at home were this. My father worked for Sears as a custodian security personnel every night. So he did the overnight shift all the time. So when we woke up in the morning, my dad had made the breakfasts. And then once we left for school, he would go to bed. My mom was a house cleaning lady, and so she'd be out for part of the day. And then when my dad left for work at 5 or sometimes 9 o'clock at night, my mom was the one who was around in the evenings, which is when we're usually all around, right? So that was kind of it. And he was a really quiet kind of guy. She was the one, if she says it, you better happen. So yeah. She kind of ruled the roost in a big way. And once in a while, he, said, "Oh, stop it. That's enough. this is it, you know?
Yeah.
And she'd have to listen. So that only happened once in a while. We did express to him what had happened, and he kind of knew, didn't do much about it. And it wasn't until about 5 years ago when I started to go through my counseling for all this that I realized that my dad did not protect me, because I always made him to be the saint. And again, this wasn't to shame him or make him look bad, but I had to own the reality that he played a part in this too. It wasn't just my mother. It was my dad. He had a role and responsibility to protect his children, and he didn't. So, but that's in hindsight, right?
Yeah. And so growing up in this, so just before we get to the paper route, how old were you around the time of the paper route?
11 years old.
Okay. So the first 11 years of your life growing up in this environment where the people who are there that are supposed to be your protectors and your teachers treat you incredibly poorly and physically abuse you at any misstep, as they would see it.
Oh yeah.
What is it like what is it just like to be in that moment?
So for me, my personality type, I wanted to please, because then I get praises, right?
Right.
So if I did the dishes really clean and something else really just cleaned up, I would get praise. So when I go to school, I tried to be like a teacher's pet. I over-tried. I was one of those kids that tried too hard and put his foot in his mouth all the time. I was one of those last picked kids for sports and you name it, you know, because there's always that trio of nerds that nobody wants to hang out with.
Right.
You know, that was me. And I tried so hard to find acceptance. And so I definitely wasn't getting it at home. I did have a number of key people in my life that, like certain teachers, because the church goes to different ministers, certain ministers came and some were really effective in being kind. I was drawn to kindness and authentic communication, you know, not this negative judgment stuff. But I was kind of a happy-go-lucky kid in spite of all this. It's like, how is that possible?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking.
Well, I talked to a psychologist because we did the whole court thing, which you'll get into in a little bit. And he asked my wife to come in, and when he was done with her, Lori said to me, "So what did he say?" He said, "So what are you doing here? You shouldn't be here. Like, people who've gone through this kind of a hell, they don't stay married. They go through relationship after relationship. They're usually addicted to alcohol and drugs, or have committed suicide by now." I know I did in the later years, if you want to get into that, but there was a dark time of seriously wanting to take my life in a couple of attempts. In fact, one place where I attempted to jump off a bridge is exactly where a funeral home is that I do chaplaincy.
Wow. I definitely want to dive into that as we get to that.
Sure. If we get there, it's great.
Chronologically. So not only was home life this incredibly negative experience, but your school life as well, which is often this place of like the one place that hopefully kids can go if home life is not great, and you're that last kid picked, you're that the nerdy person that no one wants to talk to. Yeah, absolutely. I imagine there's a lot of bullying in there.
I was really fast. I could run because I had to. I actually used those block parent homes. Did you ever hear of those?
No.
Block parent was this little red sign they used to put in the window that if you're ever in danger, this is a safe home, and it had to be vetted by the police and all that stuff. Well, nobody dared do that, but I did. I had to. The one time I had to go, and oh my goodness, yeah, that's how nerdy I was.
Yeah. So what did you feel about yourself? Like,
I didn't like myself.
Yeah.
And then if it's confirmed by everybody else's judgments, that makes it hard because I'm trying hard, and yet I kind of did like myself. I thought I like having fun. I felt I was really misunderstood growing up.
Right.
Now, that's a kind of a cheeky, fun thing to say now at age 52. I was a misunderstood kid, AKA you're a bad kid. But I was misunderstood. You know, people did not understand the intent that I thought I was a good person. I was a helper. I always was. And then to be rejected, man, I became rebellious, you know?
Yeah. So, okay. So you got this paper route to get out of the house.
Yes. Yep, because my brothers had a couple paper routes, and they didn't want to do them anymore. So I said, I'll do it, because that means, you know, I get to be doing papers when my dad leaves, my mom's there, and it's nice to not be there. Yeah. So I'm delivering, and I talk to people, I knock on doors and say hi to people, pet their dogs. One of those newspaper carrier kids. Ask for a glass of water, you know, hoping they'll give me a pop, because we were quite poor. We did not have money. And so there's a Catholic church on my route, and the priest there began to befriend me. He was German. He was part of this group called the Palatine Fathers, sent from Germany to Canada to help out Catholic dioceses. So I found that out later. So it wasn't the main priest of St. Agnes Church. It was one of the ones that was living there and helping. Okay. So a very big, that's a distinction that needs to be made. But it just started so fast. He then began to touch me, and suddenly his hands began to wander, but he'd give me candy at the same time. Or as I'm sitting on his lap and his hands went down my pants, he instantly gave me pop or a chocolate bar or something, and was always kind to me, like really kind. He took me out for a burger. Like, I don't get this stuff at home. This is called grooming, right? Mm-hmm. The correct term is groom. He groomed me to be his pet. It's really what it was. And it's not the first time this happened to him. Found that out later. But for 3 years, this guy sexually abused me. I went away on a couple trips with him because here's what's silly. Why would you go on a trip with this guy who's abusing you? Well, it's because home was hell. Yeah. Like, to think that the priest was almost better than my mom, it's a horrible thought, So either way, at one point I ended up going to Grand Bend, and he invited me to a cottage there. There's a really old lady there, and that's where I think the most excessive pressure from him came to me sexually. And it's like, oh, I knew I had to leave. And here's how it started. I walked into this cottage, and there's this floor to ceiling wall of beer bottles. And he said, hey, if you help me take them back, you can have all the money. I was like, that's like, I'm rich.
Yeah.
You see, you start to distract. You go, oh, so you give up something that's uncomfortable for what you receive. Okay. As a child, that's how it works. You don't think of bad, right, wrong. Mm-hmm. You don't have the capacity. I knew I hated it, but eventually at the end of the trip, I ended up quitting the paper route because I wanted nothing more to do with him because that was just too much. Yeah. And I ended up going to high school, and the high school is directly across the street. I wondered why I had trouble in high school. Man, I had the spiritual gift of truancy. Yeah. I exercised it a lot, but I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know all the connections, all the psychological triggers that were pounding off me from everywhere. It took me many years later, even 5 years ago, to learn all this.
Okay. So to go back to, there's this, you said, he was a chaplain at the church, right?
No, he was a priest.
He was a priest at the church. Okay. Yep. So there's this priest, he's being super nice to you. This is, a very nice change from home. Mm-hmm. He starts, like, how did the sexual abuse begin? I know you said he was grooming you. He brought you in. He's giving you candy.
Yep. That's how it began. Just by coming in. Oh, here it is. Every week we had to collect money, or every month it was a collection that you had to pick up money to pay for the papers. So right. I went door to door to every house all the time. So with that connection, that's how it became. That's a good question, because why else would you be in contact? Today, nobody does that. You pay your bill online. There's zero connection. You just deliver. In fact, some people just throw it onto the thingy. You don't have the connection. But back then, we had to go door to door and collect from every customer.
Oh, okay.
So that created the instant connection. And then because he was German, he met my parents, and trust was built there. Mm-hmm. I believed in God. So I wanted to learn more. In fact, I kind of thought, he's Catholic. Maybe I can save him. That kind of Baptist arrogance. But anyway, I authentically wanted to learn more about what does he believe? Help me understand this stuff. And that just opened the door to just the two storms crashing.
And so the first time he invited you to sit on his lap, what went through your head at that time?
I froze. You just freeze. I didn't know what to do. I felt his hands. It's like, oh, this is gross crap. But he's being nice to me. And look, he just gave me a chocolate distraction, stuff I don't get at home. It just froze. There were times towards the end there, I would tighten my belt so tight. I'd punch an extra hole into it just so he couldn't possibly reach, Mm-hmm. It's just, yeah, it became a scary thing. He taught me how to drive stick shift, but I sat on his lap.
Right.
I just didn't compute all this stuff. Mm-hmm. You think, well, you should have known. No, I couldn't have known. Not at that age.
Yeah. Especially with so much abuse going on, right? Like in situations where we're really being abused and manipulated, we don't always see things super clearly.
Yeah. Like he was kind to me. He was never mean to me, but he abused me.
Yes.
But absolutely. I knew it was wrong. I knew I hated it, but he was so nice to me and nobody else was.
Yeah. And so was this sexual for him? Like, what did he
Yep.
get out of this?
I don't know. Call it jollies.
Yeah. Okay. He
I
just
think
he just
was
liked
hoping,
it.
well, I think he was hoping that I would reciprocate and touch
Right.
him back. And he eventually he tried to, I want to be careful what I say here, but he really wanted to become very intimate. Okay.
Right.
That became, in fact, he almost like forced him. Yeah, that's all I'll say. It got really nasty in the last visit. And I had to, I kept saying, no, no, no. And he said, quieter. We can't wake her up. The old lady that was in the house. And I couldn't be quieter. And then he realized he had to stop because something, somebody's going to find out, which he knows is bad.
Yeah.
But I just knew that was it. No more. That just did it.
This
was a tipping point.
This was at the Grand Bend cottage.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
So going away from home for a weekend on the beach, eating ice cream and having pop away from my parents, that's heaven, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And to have heaven spoiled like that. Okay. Yeah. So that Grand Bend weekend, you said, that's it. No more. Yep. I'm not talking to this guy.
Yep.
You went to high school?
And then when he would drive past me, he'd honk and I would turn, away from him. I wanted nothing to do with him. And he finally got the message. That's all I remember. But then I also know I had trouble in high school. I had trouble focusing, had trouble concentrating, couldn't sleep well. Skipping classes like you wouldn't believe. Come grade 11, they kicked me out of the high school. I went to 4 different high schools in the region.
Right.
Like, what is that? So, and eventually I met who is now my wife and was dating her. And when I asked her to marry me, it was then that I told her what had happened about the priest. And she said, I can't marry you like this. You need help. I said, I'm fine. And here's the part that the double forgiveness thing that was going on, because I had in my Christian world, the Bible says we're supposed to forgive, right? So in the church world I grew up in, that meant forgive, say it, and then it's done. As in, they let people get away with whatever. I had a very, very tiny understanding of what it meant. But for me, I thought I forgave him. Okay, it's done. So eventually I called the police department and said, hey, can I speak to a counselor? Because I want to find out, am I okay? And they said, well, it sounds like you're coping quite well, but you should go in and see one of our police officers. And so I did. And this is before I got married.
And how old were you at this point?
I got married at 22. So this was when I was 21.
Gotcha. Okay.
So at age 21 now. So fast forward. Is that okay for timing?
Sure.
Okay. So I'm at 21. I'm in the police department. I share my story and they asked me why I'm doing this. And I said, because I don't want this guy around any more people, any more kids. Apparently there were some stories coming to light and lawsuits starting to happen. So they were trying to figure out if my motive was money, which I had no idea that stuff was going on. And so Officer Sig Peters, he was the officer in charge at the time. He had just started in the youth division. He's now retired and I call him a friend. So he's been on this forever. They heard my story. They believed it right away. They said, this is all these things you're telling us. We can tell this is not made up. There's too much here. It was too clear. Mm-hmm. And so they started doing an investigation. And turns out that at one point they were going to go arrest this priest. It turns out at that time he had moved to Edmonton. So they called all kinds of former altar boys and tried to find out, doing a solid investigation. Somebody tipped off the Catholic Church and tipped off Edmonton, and the cardinal from Germany wrote a letter to the Edmonton church and said, get this Father Wilford to Germany right away, like stat, vacation holiday now, as in get on the plane and leave, so he couldn't be arrested.
Right.
So there's a movie put out a couple years ago called Spotlight. Okay. If you haven't seen it, that's my story in Canada. Okay. The idea of the Catholic Church hiding and glossing over, moving priests around that were predators so that the mother church wasn't shamed. Okay. This is protection of the priests, not the people. Like, it was brutal. So when they went to arrest him, he had just left the country. He just got away. So they call him the priest that got away. Yeah. And because they couldn't prove my age, I guess they thought they knew for sure it was between 12 and 14, which is a different level of abuse. Had they dug deeper at that time to realize I was 11, they could have had him extradited from Germany. But he ended up dying in Germany, about 7 years later.
Right.
And I called the cop. Any word on this? Nope. And then he called me back a couple days later and said, you know what? We just got a letter from Interpol. He's dead. Case is closed. I was angry, and then I thought it was all over.
Tell me about that anger. Like, what were you angry about? Why were you angry? What was the anger like?
That he got away. It pissed me off that the story didn't come out, because I knew I wasn't lying, and nobody believed me. Like, it wasn't that the people didn't believe me when I told the story, but there's just something about this shameful thing. And I think that's one of the greatest effects this whole thing has had on me, is fueling my shame. Guilt and shame are two different things. Guilt says I've done something wrong. Shame says I am something wrong. And I believed I was something wrong. I was not good enough. And I grew up with that. It was confirmed through people's way of treating me. But yet, how am I doing what I'm doing? How does that work? You know? So I did want to be a bearer of good news. And when I found a growing faith in me that this God is actually a God of love, and he's not ticked off, which is what half the world thinks, I began to learn to love myself and realize this guy needs healing too. If I were to jump forward to age 45, and then you can drop me back to wherever else you want to go with this.
Sure.
But in about 7 years ago now, it's about 7 years ago, when I was 45 years old, some stories started to hit the newspaper about the Catholic priests being shipped out of the country. And I thought, oh my goodness, it just, something woke up in me. It's just like something triggered. I don't know what it is, but apparently it's normal for men that have been sexually abused. Some of the stuff doesn't wake up until they're 45 or 55 even. That's how long. I had no idea. That was totally normal. And so I contacted the New York Times to find out who the author was who wrote that article, because it was syndicated to the Toronto Star. And this guy was a guy in New York. And he said, you know what? Because I was thinking, is there a class action lawsuit? I want to put my name on it. I want to tell my story. And the guy said to me, you don't want to do that. I know a lawyer. I know the right lawyer you must talk to. And he was in London, Ontario. And so
that's convenient.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So I called this lawyer, and his first name is Robert. And I told him the story. I left a brief message. Well, they phoned me right away and said, hey, can we talk? And so this began a journey of what I needed for my own healing. And it's not done, even though it was launched into counseling. So he asked me, so what do you want? What do you want from this lawsuit? I said, well, honestly, because of my job as a pastor, I don't make a lot of money. I have not been able to save up much, because we live as giving people, but I can't afford counseling, and I know it's going to need counseling. He said, oh, we can easily do that. Well, good. So what else do you want? I said, no, that's good. So, well, we'll try and do a little bit more, which is funny. So a newspaper article was put together. You read that, except it backfired in some way, only in the Christian community, in the church world, because the title of the article said, local pastor alleges sexual assault and sues for $1.3 million. When the church world, you do that, that means you're greedy. I didn't know what the numbers meant. And basically the numbers was just a shot over the bow. You're never going to get that money. Like if you get under 5%, you're lucky, like really lucky. That's how lawsuits work. People don't know that, but I learned that pretty quick. But the coolest part was I was able to start counseling immediately. And it 3 years later, I can't believe it took that long to discover the emotional journey, to discover there are actually words for different emotions besides angry and happy and love. One of the best things my counselor gave me was this emotion chart. And you look it up on Google Images, and boom, suddenly you get this wheel of all these charts of emotions. And that chart was my little savior to begin to express things I couldn't express and put into words. Men or abused people typically have a hard time with that.
We're going to find that after for everyone listening. I'll put that in the description so you can check that out.
Yeah, it's great. There's a couple of them, but it's usually a colored wheel, but it's really helpful. And I've actually given it to a lot of people over the years, because they're sitting and talking to me, because I do counseling, so to speak, as a pastor, pastoral counseling. And I share that chart with them, and oh yeah, this is how I feel, because they don't have the terminology.
Yeah.
So the tools, to give people the tools for healing, I think that's what we need more and more of these days.
I cannot agree more. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I before we get into that, I want to jump back a little bit.
Yep.
So 21 years old, you go to the police station because you're going to marry your wife, Lori. She says, no, you got to go get counseling for this. She was like, hey, that's a big issue, right?
It was a red flag. Yeah.
Yeah. You felt that you had gotten over it, that you had forgiven this man. So you go to the police station, you get counseling.
I didn't get counseling back then.
Oh, okay.
No, my first counseling was age 45.
Okay.
When I called the police, I asked, hey, can I speak to a counselor? Well, they said, oh, you sound like you're fine. Now go to the police. So I never had any counseling at all.
Okay. I think that's a very important point in the story there, because we're going to dive in, but you get to 28 years old. So this is like a 7-year later thing. Find out he's dead.
Yep. Ticked.
Yeah. Lots of anger there. What happened in those 7 years?
I just went along my way, got married, gorgeous gal, love her to death. We ended up starting to have kids. So it was just a normal life. There didn't seem to be any major upsets, no real problems that I can remember.
And did you begin?
My opinion.
Yeah. Let's see what she says about that.
I know. You go talk to
her. And so you started working in the church at this, like
when I met Lori, she was a youth leader at the church, and I helped her as a youth leader. And I was in Bible college at the time. And so it was at her church that I became ordained and, or not ordained, whatever it was. That's when I began my licensing as a pastor. For 30 years married, 30 years as a pastor. And I've been a part of many different tribes or denominations, as they call them. Yeah.
And okay. So you were raised Baptist. You had this negative experience with Catholics. I'm rather ignorant to the different sects of Christianity. So please help me understand this. What is the difference?
I gotta be careful how I say this.
Sure.
I think as far as the different tribes, they're pretty much all the same. They just have different systems. They have different liturgies or styles. Okay. If you want to make it simple, they all talk about God. They talk about whether he's angry or loving. The system of church typically will guilt you into showing up and giving. So there's a bit of a manipulation. Okay, not just a bit, a lot of manipulation that goes on, which I've had to unlearn over the years, by the way.
Yeah.
Because I sniffed it and I went, something's not quite right there. There's something wrong with integrity. But there were other churches that were good. So depending on what the name of the church was, it's irrelevant of the name, because these days, Baptist doesn't mean the same thing anymore. Pentecostal doesn't mean the same thing anymore. Catholic, you can have a really great priest or really bad priest. It doesn't matter. Like it's that different. Right. Orthodox Church is another one that looks a lot like Catholic because they have really cool outfits and stuff too. But they just have different ways of doing it.
So how is it possible that you have this book, the Bible, which is like this manual of Christianity, of this belief system, and yet you have all of these people who are following the same manual, but in many different ways?
Yeah. Well, welcome to the last 5 years of my life.
Okay.
That's a deconstruction conversation that may have to wait till another time.
Okay.
Because from growing up, if you're told the Bible means one thing, there are some certain boundaries that you can't cross over.
Yeah.
In certain churches, but then you have other denominations or churches that have crossed over, and that looks exciting. Why do they get to do that and we don't? So the rules are crazy. I think the Bible is a great book that has been inspired. I think it's there to help us learn about Israel's history and our spiritual history. As far as a rule book, no, it's more of a love letter to. The Old Testament's got a lot of great stuff in it, but they're all incomplete stories of who God is. Because if I'm going to get preachy for just a second, this is a big one, right? But it wasn't until Jesus showed up when one of his disciples asked him, "Hey, since we're in good terms with you, can you show us your Father, God?" And Jesus said, "Guys, I've already. If you've seen me, you've seen him. We're the same." It's like, wait a minute. That's like the most radical statement in all of Scripture, because up until that point, they always saw God the Father as the angry, ticked off one. And Jesus comes and says, "No, we're the same. We're loving. If you see me as loving, that's what my Father's like. You've had it wrong all along." But, oh, shoot. He never wanted sacrifice, and yet you see all kinds of sacrifice stuff in the Bible, right? There's a way to see this now that has more hope than I ever thought. So for those who don't want to grow, you won't grow. You just keep eating your spoon-fed food of whatever you're being served up at your place. I'd say look for more. If it doesn't look like love, if it doesn't make God better and bigger, something's wrong.
Mm. Yeah,
That's my lens.
It's really interesting. And if we have time at the end of this, I do definitely want to come back to it and chat more about that, because that's incredibly interesting for me to hear you say that as someone who was raised Christian, right? And so to be like, I'm going to deconstruct these belief systems that I've been given.
So deconstruction does not mean destroying.
Yeah.
That's a big difference. Okay?
Absolutely.
Reconstruction and re-renovating some things. There are parts that were faulty that are useless and need to go. And there are parts that, oh, I misunderstood that. And you find a much better perspective. I'm on the journey. So,
right. Yeah. Okay. So,
because we're going to land on forgiveness at some point, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Just before we get there, I want to ask you, what happened family life? How was this impacted by this trauma that was never dealt with?
I think I was less huggy to my kids. I think I was scared to be a man in a marriage, which is sucky to say. I would lie about my emotions and feelings because I didn't know how to express them. But I also didn't want to put pressure on anybody because I know what it was like to be pressured. So I had a very gracious wife. She's amazing. She's like the solid anchor, that's for sure. You know, and then when I went through counseling, it got nasty because now I'm expressing things. And she said, it was stop the counseling. It's making things worse.
Right.
You know, and that was hard. You know, my kids saw it. You know, I increased my alcohol intake big time. It was and then my counselor helped me understand that I was using it as a vice. I wasn't an alcoholic because I thought, oh, shoot, I can't be an alcoholic. And turned out I was going to it. And here's the key, to not have to feel anymore, because all these emotions were coming up like crazy. And I didn't want to deal with it. Glug, 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 you know, or whatever, stay busy, work extra hard, something to avoid feeling. I never caught that. When that was told to me, I was instantly changed from the vices I was using. I stopped.
Well, you know, this is exactly what I see every day, is that we as humans often don't know how to handle these emotions that we're feeling or the experiences that we're having. So we turn to things that will numb them, whether it's smoking or drugs or alcohol or food or gambling or sex or whatever it is. They're all just symptoms of something. Yeah.
Seriously, church can be an addiction for people. They don't have to think, just follow through the routines.
Yeah, that is a super interesting one. I've not thought about it that way, but that makes a lot of sense. Okay. And so you said you weren't an alcoholic, right?
No.
Because you were using it to numb?
That's right. I was using it as a vice, and my counselor helped me understand that. And again, in one session, it was dealt with. I couldn't believe it. Like, oh. And then now we had to do the work of emotions, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's some fun work. Right. So because there wasn't the addiction to it is why you're saying that. Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay. Just, I'm understanding. So things were smooth sailing, raising the kids, you know, I mean, like aside from typical parenting stuff, but, and it was when the case reopened at 45, that's when you really had to start to go through.
So it wasn't my case that opened. It was somebody else's. It was like another story.
Yes.
Like, wow. You know, so that triggered that, hey, I got to deal with this now.
And so you mentioned Lori wasn't super happy. She was like, hey, stop the counseling. What specifically was going on? How was it showing up for you?
I was arguing more, like dominating conversations and almost wanting to finish and express every emotion because I could.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've heard from many individuals in their own stories that the same things happen to them when they're going through counseling, and it gets rocky sometimes, you know, and then this constant is talking about the priest, talking about the court case, you know, and then when we finally end up settling, which I didn't want to settle, but my wife said, settle, I'm done. Whatever they offer, take it, because we need a break from all this. I found out I could have taken it right to court. They were scared of my story because they knew I was believable, but didn't tell me that till after.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here's what's interesting, because I wouldn't have, I don't know if I remember to tell you that, but the lawsuit ended up wrapping up on a certain day, and there was a priest there from the diocese. And when it was over, it was the first time anybody from the church said I'm sorry with any authenticity.
Yeah.
And he gave me a big hug, and it was the start of a release.
Nice.
I was shocked that it would have that effect on me.
Yeah.
That's what I needed. We screwed up. Sorry. That was powerful.
And that segues us beautifully into forgiveness.
So I knew I forgave my mom. I knew I forgave the priest by the words I said, and I did the duty of forgiveness, okay? Which is different than the heart, all right? Very different. Follow the letter of the law. I did exactly what you asked to do. Like when two kids at school are fighting and the teacher says, shake hands, say I'm sorry. Well, you're making them lie. What are you doing? So I knew I was struggling with a lot of stuff, and emotionally, I didn't know how to handle it in the early ages. So this is before I met Lori. There was a time where I was driving my dad's car, and I thought, I'm just going to end all this because I just couldn't. I was so depressed. And as I'm driving the highway, there's these big round pillars under the bridges, and I gunned it. I hit the floor and floored it too. I was going to do this. And something inside, I don't know what it was, just did a quick, gentle turn, and I missed it. And I didn't spin out or nothing. It's like, oh, it scared me for a bit. But then about a couple of weeks later, I was up on a bridge, and I was going to jump into the traffic because can't screw that up. First one didn't work. Let's try this. And so I'm thinking of jumping off this bridge, and trucks are coming, and that's an easy way to do it because they can't slow down. And I didn't. I was there for a long time. This is like 3 a.m. Because there's a lot more gaps at that early in the morning. Cars weren't coming as quick. So, and you have to time it right.
Yeah.
I'm thinking through all this stuff, and I didn't jump. And all I can say, that's to me, I call that God, kind of saying, not done. We're not done your story yet. It's not going to end like that. And it's the same bridge where there's a funeral home at right now, the Walser Funeral Home. It was that bridge I was going to jump off of. Now I'm helping families deal with pain, including suicides. It's just crazy how this all fits together.
It totally is.
So if I were to move forward, if you're talking about the forgiveness thing, I've been learning about forgiveness. You know how I was talking about deconstructing some categories of faith and revisiting and putting the pieces on the table again and rebuild it. Forgiveness was one of them. There were a lot of misconceptions on forgiveness that the church typically teaches. And I have a series that I've been teaching. I think I've taught it 4 different times. I'm going to do it one more time. It's like a conference now of healing life's hurts through understanding forgiveness. That's the title of it. If you go to my YouTube channel, you'll see it there. But it's like 13 parts. We define what it is. And the best part of the series is what forgiveness is not. That just blew my mind. Because the worst misconception of forgiveness that people have is, if I forgive, then I'm automatically obligated to go back into a relationship with them. Because if I don't, then I really didn't forgive them.
Right.
That is a lie. Okay. Reconciliation is not required for forgiveness to happen. It doesn't. I believe forgiveness is from my heart for me. If it blesses the other person, great. But it's for my sake, not the other person's sake.
Yeah.
And I couldn't do the court thing until I had fully forgiven this priest fully, because now I can do it without ulterior motives.
Yeah.
Right? If
Absolutely.
you do it out of anger and spite, oh my goodness, it's just different. So that's where forgiveness became a really big deal. And I realized that's one of the worst hurts people are struggling with in life. There's death and dying. There's grieving. And then there's forgiveness is a really big one. And the last one for me, they don't know who they are. They don't know identity. And so those are the 3 categories that I tend to focus on more than anything else. But that's where forgiveness came in.
Yeah. It's something on your note about you forgive others for you, right?
Yep.
Not for the other people.
Correct.
I would love to hear your thoughts on this, because I work with people all the time who are like so afraid of being selfish in any capacity that they don't take care of themselves, right? And they find themselves in this position of stuck because there's that belief, and forgiveness is like a huge part of that, right? Yep. What do you think about that?
I think they have an identity crisis. And with that identity crisis, they don't know who they are. They don't know they're valued. They don't know they're liked. They don't know they're loved. And if they can learn those three things, and in my world, I do it from God. Like, God totally loves us unconditionally, totally likes us, is crazy about us, and totally values us. When you begin to believe that, then you start to live out what you believe. That person who's living like that, not taking care of themselves, is living out a belief. Whatever they're acting like is exactly what they're believing at that moment.
Yes.
So I know exactly what's going on. You don't believe it. You say God's love, but you don't believe it at all, because the fruit of real love doesn't look like that.
Yeah.
So everybody lives out their lives based on what they believe. If they believe God exists or doesn't exist, if they like themselves or don't like themselves, they live exactly according to their belief. So
Yes.
to me, it's going deeper. Let's take a look at what your belief system's like. And I'm not just spirituality, but how do you see yourself? How do you see the world around you? You know, have a holistic approach, because it'll affect your body, how you take care of yourself, your physically, your soul, your mind, the whole being.
Welcome to Sword.
Sword. There you go. What's the acronym for? Forgive me.
This is acronym for what we want to accomplish. People note in the podcast, this is not planned. This is not a paid sponsorship or anything. Service to others is a huge part of what we want to accomplish. Operations is the O. This is training people, coaching people, mentoring people. And then R&D's research and development for how do we continue to understand this better and deliver it better.
That's really cool.
Yeah,
it's very similar.
Yeah. So, okay. And where...
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I want to wrap up the forgiveness part. You can come back and jump on it again later, but there's a final story to the forgiveness part that caught me off guard.
Please go ahead.
Because I'm a funeral home chaplain, I do a lot of funerals, and I love doing funerals. I really do. I love helping people walk through that. I try to make it more light instead of the heavy, dearly beloved, anything like that. I do that. You got to pay more for fake. But there was one time my mom had died now. Okay. So this is 2 years ago today. Like, I think it's before Christmas even. I think it's almost exactly 2 years. That's weird. My mom had been dead for 5 years. Sorry. And I knew that when I spoke of her, I'd always have a sharpness in my tone. She was a bitch. And you can't call your mother that. Oh, yes, I can. And just the harshness of it. My bitterness began to grow, even though I forgave her. So in my series, I talk about the part of forgiving in the process is called re-forgiving. That's part of the process, because forgiveness is process and what's the word I had? Darn. But it's a moment and it's a process. So it's a single act and it's a process that has to be worked out. So it's not a one-time, one stab there, I've done it, which is what I grew up believing. But now you work out that forgiveness. And as you begin to believe that forgiveness in you, then you start to act out that forgiveness over time and you become that forgiving person. That's kind of how I've come to see it. So I get a call from the funeral home, say, hey, we need to do a funeral and the burial will be at the Woodland Cemetery. Okay, great. Suddenly I get this sense in my head of not a voice, because that's weird, but it was like God saying, hey, Mike, I want you to go over and visit your mom's grave. Nah, we're okay. I'm good. And it was just a different prompting. I knew something was strange with this one. And so eventually did the service, did the burial, and I was heading out the cemetery, and suddenly there's a tap, tap, tap on my shoulder. God saying, hey, fine. Well, in the last 2 years before that, I've been learning about quantum physics. I've been studying afterlife, what it means for people to pass over from this to the next life, and what it can, and with hope-filled lenses, okay, like the good stuff. Like, I've heard way too many stories in 30 years of people passing away, of the funky things that can happen, from the body floating away to them seeing the light to calling out. I was in a room with one person when a little girl was with her grandma, and the grandma was dying, and the little girl, grandma, don't go. And suddenly the grandma kind of woke up for a second, says, who called me back? And the proud little girl, it was me, grandma. She says, don't do that. Don't do that again. Let me go. He was reaching out his hand to me. I was like, holy crap. That was freaky. Mm-hmm. So anyway, things like that. So all the stuff had been brought to my attention. And when I got to graveside, it was like, okay, what do you want, God? My dad had died too. And so here I'm looking at mom and dad, and usually I give her a hard time. But this time it was like God saying, Mike, if we pass on to the other side, and as we're passing on, we begin to see reality differently and better, more clearly. and the drudge of this world, the senses of this world, don't hold us back from seeing what is true. And your mom has done that. And she now sees things in reality, in heaven, and whatever you call it, more clearly than ever before. What do you think she'd say if she could peek back through that curtain? Bawl my eyes out. Because I knew she would peek through and just say and weep, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I never spoke bitterly about her ever since. It was like forgiveness bore fruit. It took that long for it to become so authentic. So no, forgiveness isn't just a quick fix. It's a difficult, long process. Not always, but for the deeper the pain, oh yeah, you better believe it. It's not quick. Don't think forgiveness is letting them get off scot-free, because it's not. That's another misconception. So I'm still learning.
Yeah. And I love that you continue to show up and say, this is the journey, right? There's not the destination to this learning process, but it's just the continual journey for life.
I think that the topic of forgiveness is one of the top issues for every single human. I really do. And if we're being hindered from actually practicing and processing forgiveness because of some stupid misconceptions taught by the church or not, or people or traditions, we don't do that. Like, I think if we can realize that that is the fertilizer for a very healthy life, like people's physical healing can come from forgiveness. Yes. Because you end up burying it deep inside into your gut or into your neck and shoulders. And where are all the cancer places right now? Not saying that people who get cancer aren't forgiving. That's not what I'm saying. But there is something to this. I've done enough reading. There's a pattern.
And I do think that there's a lot to be said that our mental health is intimately linked to our physical health, right?
Absolutely.
And for anyone who's listening and is like, I don't really see that, a really simple example that I love is imagine for a moment that you're stressed in traffic about getting to a meeting or something.
It never happens to me.
Yeah. Okay. So if you imagine yourself even imagining being stressed, you will start to have a stress response. We're 2 imagines away, but your body will have a physical response to your mind.
Because that's where your attention focuses.
Exactly. Right. So to think that us not forgiving and us harboring these negative emotions does not have any sort of physical impact on us is just silly, ludicrous.
Yep. I agree.
So how do we move forward with forgiveness? What are the next steps in your opinion?
Admit you don't know what forgiveness fully is. That's a good start.
Right.
Do you know who you are? Ask that question and begin searching out for somebody that can help you and guide you in that. Not as the answer people. We're not vending machines, but we can be coaches to guide. I just talked to another person an hour before I talked to you. I tell people, well, can I tell you about my journey? And I share the journey. And instead of trying to give them quick fixes, it's not a prescription. It's an invitation to on a trip that will change your life. You just gotta be willing to do it.
I so agree. I'm just like totally right there with you, Mike.
Cool. I will send you a document or a JPEG I've made of what forgiveness is not. And that could be fun. I think it's like 18 or 17 things, but I just crammed it into one document. I'll fire that off to you too. Cause I think if you go through that list, that could be a help too.
Yeah. So I'll see if I can put that in the description or somehow get it to people. Matter. Yeah. Well, hey, you got resources that could help people.
Yep.
Why not?
That whole series, my whole series on forgiveness is online. Look up Mike Zenker, type it into YouTube, it's there. And then in my playlist, there's one called Healing Life's Hurts Through Understanding Forgiveness. And I'm going to be doing it as a conference, an online conference in the new year, because I think it needs to be redone.
Yeah. So do I have that information from you?
No.
Okay. Can you give me that information?
I don't know when I'm doing it yet.
Okay. Then
I'm dreaming out loud and I just haven't gotten to it.
Well, okay. If people want to reach out to you, how can they reach out to you?
If you're on Facebook, look me up. I look like this. And then, sorry, except I have glasses on, sunglasses on.
At Mike Zenker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably my website. You're going to put all the links there anyway.
Yeah. So, okay. Check the description.
That's the easiest. Yeah.
Okay.
YouTube's the fastest, and then find a way to message me. Yeah. Or get a hold of you.
Yeah. That works as well. So is there any last thing that you want to throw in here. What advice would you give to someone who's really struggling right now? Or any last points?
You weren't told everything. You weren't. None of us were given all the information. Most of us have been hurt by hurt people. That's what happens. Hurt people hurt people. And so the fruit of seeing what my mother did to me and what this priest did to me, not as an excuse, because they need to be held accountable for everything they did, but when I've come to a place of at least understanding what were some of the contributing factors that led to this behavior, I don't want to repeat those.
Yeah.
I want to be a more loving person, which means I got to focus my attention on love more, but now that means we got to define what love is, Tina Turner was wrong. What's love got to do with it? It's got everything to do with it.
Yeah.
Love wins, and love is, we're not talking about sexual stuff. We're talking about the authentic, unconditional acceptance and care of our fellow humans, regardless of gender, regardless of culture, you name it. There cannot be, it has to be inclusive. It's the church that's made it exclusive in many ways. Not all churches, but by and large, religion has separated us into a system of us versus them. That's got to go, because that's not what this Jesus came to do, okay? He didn't even come to set up religion. Jesus wasn't even a Christian, for Pete's sake. It's hilarious that people think about it. They go, what? But these are the kinds of things that make us think that you haven't been given all the information. You haven't been given all the information about who you are, but you can find out. You're a good person. You've been made to be loved and to love. People, you got to believe that. No matter what damage was done to you, don't let your past pain dictate your future. You still get to change the direction. You can't blame your past anymore. That's the easy way out. To start talking to people who've gone through the journey, and you'll find hope. That's what I'm about. I want people to find hope in their stories. Which
is such an incredibly important thing to find in order to get through the journey. Awesome. Thank you, Mike. This podcast is brought to you by Sword Academy, where you can build the best you possible. You can find out more at Sword Academy. If you found this podcast beneficial, please consider subscribing it and sharing this episode with someone who might benefit from this as well. You never know what one thing could change their life. Thanks again, Mike.
Absolutely. Thanks.